Good morning everyone. Today we're going to talk about the theories of second language acquisition. I know some of you are very familiar with the first language and second language. Let's begin with the first slide. What exactly is second language? Broadly speaking, a second language or L2 refers to any language learned after one first language or L1, no matter how many others have been learned. In this part, what do we mean when we say first language or L1 and second language or L2? Every individual, since their very young age, they have learned at least one language, and we call that as the first language, and the language that is learned after that first language is what we call second language. How the first language different from second language? Usually, if we say first language, this is learned without much effort or without much thinking about it, while learning the second language needs some effort in learning it. And now let's proceed to the second slide. Behaviorism. As described in Chapter 6, early researchers attempted to apply behavior theories and research to understanding first language acquisition. Behaviorist theories were applied to second language learning as well, and the approach was widely influential in the 1950s and 1960s. Behaviorists believed that second language learners, like children learning their native tongues or any other skill for that matter, acquired the appropriate language, behavior, or habits through repetition and reinforcement. Teachers have a lot of ideas about how a second language is acquired. Some of those ideas are based on their intuition, something that languages are acquired through imitation. The teacher says a word or phrase and the student repeats until it is learned correctly. In other words, the student imitates the teacher's behavior. The teacher gives positive reinforcement when the student repeats correctly. The positive reinforcement can be in the form of smile, approval, or praise. Good job, something like that. Or the teacher gives a correction and the student changes the behavior. The teacher now reinforces the correct behavior. The teacher views this youth language acquisition as acquiring a series of correct behaviors, through conditioning. And this view of second language acquisition is a behaviorist view. And now let's talk about the comprehensible input and the natural order hypothesis. Beginning in the 1970s, another view of L2 learning became popular. Rather than treating language as a series of mechanical habits that are learned through reinforcement, researchers began to view language learning as a more complex interaction of internal and external factors. One example of this approach can be found in work of Stephen Krashen, who believed L2 learners needed to be exposed to a social kind of input in order to learn the target language. Krashen recognized the importance to language learning comprehensible input, that is, input in the target language that is understandable in a particular context of use but slightly more advanced than the learner's current level ability. Comprehensible input is often abbreviated as I+1, where I refers to the learner's current level and +1 denotes the slightly more advanced input. Through exposure to this input, L2 acquisition was believed to progress automatically in the same fashion as L1 acquisition, but only if the learner's affective filter or emotional barrier was sufficiently low. Krashen also argued that there is natural order of acquisition. In other words, he claimed that all learners, regardless of their L1 progress, through the same stages of second language development and in the same order. The natural order hypothesis was based on a series of studies known as the Morpheme order studies. Although the Krashen hypothesis were subject to criticism on both theoretical and methodological grounds, his model was influential. So, Stephen-Krashen theory of second language acquisition. So, Stephen-Krashen is an expert in the fields of linguistics, specializing in theories of second language acquisition and development. Much of his research has involved the study of non-English and bilingual language acquisition. Since 1980, he has published well over 100 books and articles and has been invited to deliver over 300 lectures at universities throughout the United States and Canada. This is a brief description of Krashen's widely known and well-accepted theory of second language acquisition, which has had a large impact in all areas of second language research and teaching. So according to him, language acquisition does not require extensive use of conscious grammatical rules and does not require teacher's drill. So acquisition requires meaningful interaction in the target language, so natural communication in which speakers are concerned not with the form of their utterances but with the messages they are conveying and understanding. So comprehensible input is the crucial and necessary ingredient for the acquisition of language. The best method are therefore those that supply comprehensible input in low anxiety situations, so containing messages that students really want to hear. So these methods does not force early production in the second language, but allow students to produce when they are ready, recognizing the improvements come from the supplying communicative and comprehensible input, and not from forcing and correcting production. In the real-world conversation with sympathetic native speakers who are willing to help the acquirer understand are very helpful. So, the 5 hypotheses of Krashen theory of second language acquisition. Krashen theory of second language acquisition consists of 5 main hypotheses. First is the acquisition learning hypothesis, second the monitor hypothesis, third the input hypothesis, and fourth the affected filter hypothesis, and fifth the natural order hypothesis. So first is the acquisition learning. Distinction is the most fundamental of the 5 hypotheses in Krashen theory and the most widely known among linguists and language teachers. So the acquisition learning hypothesis, according to Krashen, there are 2 independent systems of foreign language performance, the acquired system and the learned system. The acquired system or acquisition is the product of subconscious process very similar to the process children undergo when they are acquired their first language. So it requires meaningful interaction in the target language, natural communication in which speakers are concentrated not in the form of their utterances but in the communicative act. So next is the monitor. The monitor hypothesis explains the relationship between the acquisition and learning and defines the influence of the latter on the former. So in this part, the monitor hypothesis, the monitoring function is the practical result of the learned grammar. According to Krashen, the acquisition system is the utterance initiator, and while the learning system performs the role of the monitor or the editor. The monitor acts in planning, editing, and correcting function when 3 specific conditions are met. The second language learner has sufficient time at their disposal. They focus on form or think about correctness. They knew the rule. So next is the input hypothesis. In Krashen attempt to explain how the learner acquire a second language, how second language acquisition takes place. And the input hypothesis is only concerned with the acquisition, not learning. According to this hypothesis, the learner improves and progresses along the natural order when he/she receives second language input that is one step beyond his/her current stage of linguistic competence. So next is the affected hypothesis. Embodies Krashen's view what a number of affected variables play or facilitative but non-casual role in second language acquisition. So in this part, Um, the affective filter hypothesis, these variables include motivation, self-confidence, anxiety, personality traits. Krashen claims that learners with high motivation or self-confidence, a good self-image, a low level of anxiety, and extroversion are better equipped for success in second language acquisition. So low motivation, low self-esteem, anxiety, introversion, and inhibition can waste the affective filter and form a mental block that prevents comprehensible input from being used for acquisition. In the other words, when the filter is up, it impedes language acquisition. On the other hand, positive effect is necessary but not sufficient on its own for acquisition to take place. So last is finally the less important natural order hypothesis is based on research findings. Um, Dulay and Port 1974, Fatman 1975, Makino 1980, cited in Krashen 1987, which suggested that the acquisition of grammatical structure follows a natural order which is predictable. Um, the natural order hypothesis for a given language, some grammatical structure tend to be acquired early while others late. This other seems to be independent of the learner's age, L1 background condition of exposure, and although the agreement between individual acquirers was not always 100% in the study. So there were statistically significant similarities that reinforced the existence of natural order of language acquisition. So Krashen, however, points out that the implication of the natural order hypothesis is not that a language program that syllables should be based on the order found in the studies. So in fact, he rejects grammatical sequencing when the goal is language acquisition. The interaction hypothesis. The interaction hypothesis, stemming from the work of Michael Long and Susan Gass, suggests that second language development can be facilitated when learners attempt to communicate with other speakers in the elder experience difficulties and engage in further interaction with their interlocutors to resolve their problems. So, as part of this process, learners often need to seek help in order to comprehend the input they receive by using clarification requests such as, "Could you do that again?" So here we have three examples. So here is the example number 1. NS, or native speaker. There's just a couple more things. NNS, or non-native speaker. Sorry, couple, so that is a clarification request. NS, couple more things in the room, only just a couple. NNS, couple? What does it mean, couple? Clarification request. NS, like two things, 2 or 3 things. NNS, more. NS, yeah. So, in example number 1 below, the learner, the non-native speaker, or NNS, fails to understand the native speaker, or NS, utterance. By using a clarification request, she able to obtain input that is more comprehensible and perhaps better suited to her language learning. So here in example number 2, NNS, the window are crossed. NS, the windows have what? NNS, cross. NS, cross, I'm not sure what you're saying there. NNS, window are closed. So NS, the windows are closed. Okay, sorry. So in example number 2, during interaction, learners also need to produce output that is comprehensible to others. In example number 2, the NNS, or non-native speaker, produce an utterance that is incomprehensible to her partner. In this case, she must draw upon her linguistic knowledge of English phonology or syntax, for example, to make herself understood. This process is known as producing modified output. So let's proceed to example number 3. S. The boy have many flowers in his basket. T. Yes, the boy has many flowers in his basket. Recast or corrective feedback. So that is what it calls. So in example number two, through process such as obtaining comprehensible input and producing modified output, interaction is believed to help draw learners' attention to problematic differences between their interlanguage, their current knowledge of the target language, and the native form of their target language. When learners receive feedback on their L2 production through clarification requests, their attention can be drawn to gaps. That is, to areas in their linguistic knowledge which are in need of improvement. For instance, in example number three, the student makes an error in subject-verb agreement, and the teacher provides corrective feedback in the form of recast in her subsequent uterine. So a recast is a more target-like way of expressing what is perceived to be a learner's intended meaning, changing the form but not the content of the uterance.
Okay, so the other theory is the socio-culturalism. So, um, so interactionist focuses on by interaction, and socioculturalist focuses on the impact of interpersonal and social aspects of interaction on language learning. So, interactionist focuses on how a person thinks and acts through interaction, while socioculturalist focuses on the effect of communicating with other people on learning a language. So, these two both value interaction. Okay. So, sociocultural theory posits that all cognitive development, including language, stems from interactions between individuals. So, how a person think and talk a certain language is influenced by his environment or whom he surrounds himself to. So, for instance, just take a look in the given picture. So if the parents of the child love to play music when he is around, he will also be fond in music. So if you are raised by a religious and respectful family, you will also be like them. So that is the point of view of social culturalism. Okay. So, one type of interaction that has received research attention in sociocultural studies of second language learning is the interaction between a less skilled L2 learner and a more expert, or a teacher, for example, or it could be a tutor. So, the expert can provide the learner with the form of scaffolding. So, the teacher here is going to adjust for the for his student. So, for example, in the picture, so through the interaction of an expert to less skilled L2 learner, the expert could guide and educate his student to the important features of the task that will provide an opportunity for the student to create a linguistic skill thanks to the help of interaction. Okay, so take a look in this example of social-cultural study. So in this study, a two grade 8 immersion students, Kim and Rick, were given a task for their classroom activity. So, okay, so as being said that through the interaction between the two, they were able to exchange their ideas and provide a correct answer. So this is the power of interaction and communication. Instead of being silent for the rest of your life, try talking to others. So in this um in this example, you will see Kim and Rick are discussing about their classroom activity. They are giving their ideas, exchanging their ideas. to create or provide idea. Okay, so next theory is, okay, so this study thus provides evidence for socioculturalist claims that interaction involving some kind of scaffolding or co-construction can be a source of linguistic development. So this is the explanation from the previous slide that I have given you, the example between the teacher and the learner or his student. Okay, so next theory is about the universal grammar. So universal grammar, or broadly known as nativism. So we are familiar to this word, the nativism. So this is the proposed by Noam Chomsky. So this is Noam Chomsky. So he came up with the idea of a language organ, which is known as the language acquisition device, so LAD. Okay, so this theory came about as children have been observed to pick up grammar and syntax without any formal teaching in spoken language. So the term universal grammar has been used to describe the knowledge contained in the LAD. Okay, so the LAD is a hypothetical tool hardwired into the brain that helps children rapidly learn and understand language. So Chomsky used it to explain just how amazingly children are able to acquire language abilities, as well as accounting for the innate understanding of grammar and syntax all children possess. Okay, so the location and content of the LAD remains a topic of debate. So the location of the LAD device in our brain, or the LAD device in the brain, is not yet certain. So neurologists have identified multiple areas of the brain responsible for the perception, so comprehension and production of language. So the LAD is a device, part of our brain, that makes children learn and understand language quickly. Okay, so um, these researchers argue that once a learner has passed a critical or sensitive period for language acquisition, typically placed around the age of puberty, so the language acquisition device atrophies and the knowledge it contains, the universal grammar, is no longer directly available to help guide the second language learning process. So, okay, so for the girls, this is like um in 11 years old, the puberty age, I think, while for the boys, it's 12 years old. Okay, so the nativist conducted acceptability or grammaticality. So judgment tests to investigate whether and until what age universal grammar may be available to L2 learners. So this study was conducted to test if and investigate what until what age universal grammar may be available to L2 learners. So these are three groups of English language learner who were be tested. So these are Indonesian, Chinese, and Korean native speakers. So if they will all get the correct answer in each sentence, there will be the possibility that they had access to universal grammar. Okay, so the purpose of this test is to know if they handle grammatically complex sentences. So the most of the participants got it right in the part where to indicate which ones were grammatical and not. However, they got it wrong when they marked the ungrammatical as the grammatical. The researcher concluded that these learners don't have access in universal grammar. Okay, so next theory is frequency-based approach. So, okay, so what is frequency in language acquisition? So, frequency is thus a key determinant of acquisition because rules of language at all levels of analysis, from phonology to syntax to discourse, are structural regularities that emerge from learners' lifetime analysis of the distributional characteristic of the language input. So, um, Nick Ellis, so he argued that frequency-based approaches make sense because unlike UG, they engage with other approaches to first and second language acquisition. So this is also undergone cognitive neuroscience research into the measurable processes going on in the brains of second language learners. So Nick Ellis argued that this was um, more makes sense than the UG or the universal grammar. Okay, so uh, these two researchers carried out a laboratory study of SLA in which they controlled the prior knowledge and frequency of exposure to linguistic input by having both adult humans and a computational associative learning system acquire an artificial language. So, both accuracy and response time were tested by Alice Smidge. Both accuracy and reaction time. So, finding an advantage for regular plurals and high frequency items. They also found that the frequency effect was larger for irregulars, especially in the middle stages of learning. Okay, so this result differed from previous researcher. However, in the early stages of acquisition, showed frequency effects for regular items as well as irregulars. So the sizes of these effects decreased as the learners learned more with the size of the frequency effect on irregular items diminishing more slowly. So they concluded that it is not in fact necessary to postulate underlying rules rather than being a hybrid system of learning in which some forms are rule generated and others are learned by associative memory. So they claim that all the effects could be explained as a natural result of simple associative learning.
Good day everyone, my name is Marlo Manangit and now let's talk about the individual differences in second language acquisition. There are advantages of second language acquisition. According to scientific surveys, language aspects such as pronunciation and intonation can be acquired easier during childhood due to neuromuscular mechanisms which are only active until the age of 12. Another possible explanation of children's accent-free pronunciation is their increased capability for imitation. This capability fades away significantly after puberty. Other factors that we should take into consideration are children's flexibility, spontaneity, and tolerance to new experiences. Kids are more willing to communicate with people than adults. They are communicate with people and curious and they are not afraid of making mistakes. They handle difficulties such as missing vocabulary very easy by using creative methods to communicate, such as nonverbal means of communication and use of onomatopoetic words. Also, the idea of a foreign civilization is not formed in their minds yet. Only at the age of 8 does it become clear to them that there are ethnic and cultural differences. Last but not least, aspects such as time, greater learning, and memory capacity are in a case advantage in early language acquisition. Okay, let's proceed to age. Another individual differences thought to play a factor in second place is language learning is a function of one's age. Its prevalent belief that younger people speak in a different way than other people. Learners who are older are more successful, and researchers have discovered a link between age and acquisition and eventual attainment in at least some areas of the second language, with age being the largest predictor of success. The critical period hypothesis is one theory proposed to explain children's apparent advantage in language development. This concept, first proposed by Eric Lenberg in the late 1960s, asserts that language learning must occur before puberty for a speaker to achieve native-like fluency. Since then, a number of neurological changes thought to occur throughout puberty have been proposed as probable causes for the critical time. In age, everyone agrees that age is a crucial factor of language learning. For me, like, children are more competitive or have more ideas or of having or learning different language, and compared to some old people, they may forget because of their memories, so they can't easily absorb any language or use any language because maybe their brain are not enough to absorb or to learn some language. Children have more their brain is more have strong enough to obtain language that can be, or maybe they are learning some language, and sometimes children may adapt or learn to other people because they every day they are learning, so maybe they can hear some language that can be new to them so that they can adapt it and use it. Okay, let's proceed to gender. Another individual variable that could affect second language development is the gender. The learner's gender, females, for example, have been discovered to have a proclivity for males use more language learning tactics and do so more frequently than females. Females are often more optimistic about learning a second language and may be more motivated according to other studies. However, results have been mixed in terms of performance. Some studies imply that female students outperform male pupils, while others suggest that. So in gender, men and women have different communication purposes. When interacting, men strive to fix things. For men, conversation goals are dominance and tangible results. They place greater value in their end goal and their independence. Conversation from the male perspective is often more pragmatic. When women share their feelings, men strive to identify and solve the problem. In women use conversation to express ideas, increase social connections, and build relationships. Women want to feel supported, heard, understood, and respected. Women often wish to discuss problems in order to describe how they are feeling. When their partner tells them what to do, they do not feel heard. The woman often feels that he does not understand or care about her feelings. She just wants to be acknowledged and heard when discussing her concerns and feelings. So, between men and women, I know that women is mas magaling pa sila the way they speak. For example, in English, they are fluently in speaking English. I believe that women are more fluently in speaking in English. So they also easily absorb or obtain ideas because most of the women loves reading. So maybe in reading they obtain some knowledge, and they sometimes magagamit din nila yun para, for example, the way sila mag-speak, their feelings. So parang the way yung nagbabasa, abang sila yung nagbabasa, their feelings to that specific stories, maybe they can apply it in sa panahon natin ngayon. So for example, magkwento sila sa mga friends nila. So parang the way they read the specific stories, the way rin silang magkwento sa mga kaibigan nila, ganun. So I believe that women are more the way speak in fluently in English.
Good day once again. I will be the one to continue the individual differences in our second language acquisition. So let's proceed on the working memory. I will just give you a short explanation about this working memory for you to clearly and directly understand what is this working memory talking about. Working memory daw po, ito ay yung pag-store ng information sa brain natin. Pag-store ng information. Kahit gaano pa yan kaliit na information, nagbibuild po yan ng structure sa brain natin na kung saan naa-adapt natin and naaalala natin. For example, sa bahay, may baby. Then yung baby na yon, that baby started to learn talking. Then, a parent of that baby, hinahayaan siyang manood ng television, and doon sa television na yon, for example, nanonood siya ng cartoons. Doon sa cartoons na yon, kung ano yung pinanggagawa or kung ano yung pinagsasalita ng cartoon na yon doon sa television, na-adapt yon ng baby at yun yung nagsustore sa mind ng baby na kung saan naaalala niya at naa-adapt niya or ginagaya. So that was working memory talking about. So next is in addition pala regarding sa working memory, sa mga nagtatanong kung paano nag-connect yung second language acquisition sa working memory. So we all know that the first language acquisition, first language acquisition natin na ginagamit sa Philippines, is the Filipino language. Yun yung wika natin. Then this second language acquisition, this one serves as English. Ito yung pinag-aaralan natin. So how does this one affect to the memory and working memory? So ganun po, ang second language acquisition, nakaka-apekto po siya sa working memory kasi nagsustor po tayo ng information kapag pinag-aaralan natin kung ano yung information na nakapaloob sa English. So, katulad natin, we future educators, especially the BSed English, we are focusing on the language of the English language. So, magfo-focus tayo doon sa information, sa language, sa culture, some other traditions, the origin of that particular language. Ini-store ng mind natin yung information na nababasa, even just reading, na nakaka-store tayo ng information sa particular language na fino-focus natin or information. So that was the connection. Let's proceed to the next part, which is the motivation. So this motivation talks about the examining of the failures or the success of the learner. Then it is also plays a vital role in the language learning because according to the study, the one who is teaching to the learners were just like planting a seed for them to help the learners build their self-confidence. Minomotivate daw nila yung mga learners na mag-aral. Actually, we already tackled it kay Sir Tito. And he said that may dalawang types ang motivation. The first one is the extrinsic and the second one is the intrinsic. I will give you an example of the extrinsic. The extrinsic daw, yun yung, for example, ang teacher, bibigyan niya ng pera kung sino ang makaka-perfect ng exam sa students niya. So that is an example of extrinsic. While the intrinsic, the teachers will give a 100 points to the students who will perfect the exam. I mean, in addition lang, and as part of this slide na rin para ma-explain ko ng maayos, for example, yung ako di ako gaanong matalino, then yung mga friends ko, yung circle of friends ko, lahat sila matatalino, puros honor students. Then, nai-influence nila ako sa mga ginagawa nila, like, nagsa-study, nagsa-strive sa school, may mga awards na namomotivate ako na gawin din kung ano yung ginagawa nila para di ako magmukhang parang naiiwan sa grupo, or namotivate ako na gawin din yung mga ginagawa nila kasi na-influence nga nila ako. So, yan yung isa sa example sa motivation. The next one is the context of the second language learning. So, I will just give you a very short explanation about this kasi madali lang talaga siyang i-identify. Itong context of second language learning, ito ay yung pag-aaral na kung saan hindi lang yung lingwahe ninyo, kundi pati yung ibang lingwahe. Pinag-aaralan nyo yung ibang lingwahe para mag-store kayo ng information. So, next slide is ito. For example, naka-indicate dito na may dalawang grupo na natural English speakers. Then, nahati sila sa dalawang grupo. Yung isang grupo, nag-attend sa isang study abroad program sa Spain. Then, yung isa sa US. Yung dalawang grupo na yon na natural English speakers, sila ay nag-aaral ng Spanish na language. So, ayun na nga. They were separated kasi yung isang grupo nasa US nag-aral ng Spanish language. Then, yung isa naman is dun talaga sa Spain, which is nakakasalamuhan nila talaga yung mga Spanish people. So, after ng study nila, yung mga nag-aral sa US lamang na ng Spanish, na-improve yung skills nila. However, yung nag-aral sa Spain talaga ng Spanish language is mas natuto ng mabilis kasi nakakasalamuha talaga nila yung mga tao na ang wika is Spanish, and they were surrounded by the Spanish people, kaya yun yung reason kung bakit mas na-improve, mas magaling, or mas enhance sila sa pagsasalita ng Spanish language.
So, good day. I'm Aprilline Lacre, and I will be presenting the Second Language Acquisition, or the SLA process. SLA processes investigating theories about how second languages are learned and how second language learners may vary in terms of individual. In this process, we will know how children adopt or learn the second language. The researchers also set to understand various process-related factors that learners have in common. So, SLA researchers have focused on the psycholinguistics of a second language learning. So, as I've said, that the SLA researchers have focused on the psycholinguistic of second language learning, studying the role of attention, developmental sequence, and fossilization. So, first, we know that psycholinguistic is an integration of two disciplines, the psychology and the linguistic. So, the psychology is the study of mind and behavior, and the linguistics is the study of language. So, in general, psycholinguistic can be defined as the study of mind and language. So now let's discuss the SLA processes. So first, what is the role of attention? So we all know that every children often seem to be unaware on their own mistakes and of the corrections occasionally made by their parents. So frequently, disregard the difference between what they say and what the models are offered to them. So attention is the behavioral and cognitive processes of selectively concentrating on a discrete aspect of information. So dito na papasok yung noticing hypothesis of SLA by Richard Schmidt, 2001. So, noticing hypothesis. So, according to this hypothesis, subliminal or unconscious learning is impossible. In other words, those features of the L2 or second language that are not noticed do not get stored in the short memory system and thus are not learned. So, learners cannot learn the grammatical features of a language unless they notice them. So, noticing is the essential starting point of the accusation. So, now let's move forward to developmental sequences. So, a major goal of SLA research has been to determine whether there are regular developmental sequences that are common to all second language learners. So, a developmental sequence is a series of identifiable stages that L2 learners pass through in acquiring the second language. So, this research shows that the second language learners acquire the non-native language in regular, systematic fashion, much like learners acquiring their native languages. So, question formation is one of the best understood developmental sequences in the acquisition of English as a second language. So, most researchers have found that second language learners of English typically pass through similar stages in learning how to form questions in English, and that they do similar stages in learning how to form questions in English, and that they do so in the same order. So, let's discuss the proposed stages of question formation. The stage 1 is single words or sentence fragments. From the word single words or sentence fragments means asking a single thing without any supporting details. For example, one astronaut outside the spaceship, or 4 children, dog. So that's the example of the stage 1. So let's move on to stage 2. The canonical word order. The canonical word order, or a sentence that have a clause on it, which means it has a SOV or subject, object, and verb in the sentence. Example, it's a monster in the right corner. The second example is the boys throw the shoe. He have 2 houses in front. Or the janitor throw a garbage. Or the student running in the classroom. So that's the example of the stage 2. So now is the stage 3, or WH fronting and do fronting. WH and do fronting. WH means using the word how, what, why, where, and the do fronting for does.
There are different teaching methods. The first one is the grammar translation. So this method means teaching a target language. So for example, your target language is English. Is to translate it into mother tongue. The teacher translates each word and sentence into the mother tongue. So a fundamental purpose of teaching the target language through the grammar translation method is to be able to read literature written in the target language. This purpose can be reached by learning about the grammar rules and vocabulary of the target language. So the importance of understanding and conveying meaning could be useful for adults as well. So the advantage of this method is that the teacher helps to clear the meaning of a word and sentence to the students by translating them into the mother tongue. So, second is that the students' vocabulary of the English language as students to learn to consult English dictionaries to know the meaning of new words. So, the disadvantage is that no oral work takes place in the classroom due to this method, so the only teacher speaks. Second is that the students don't develop power of thinking in the target language, so they become mentally lazy. Second method. So this method, direct method of teaching, so which is sometimes called the natural method. It is often used in teaching foreign languages. It refrains from using the learner's native language and uses only the target language. So for example, if your target language is Korean language, then that is the only language you have to speak. So the focus on not on grammar but instead on learning through listening and speaking. So the advantage of this method is that it focuses only on the oral practices, so your pronunciation improves. So it makes the teaching easier and more pleasant. So the teacher uses various images or pictures to illustrate his or her point. So this advantage is that owing to overemphasis on oral practice, so the other skill, namely reading and writing, are ignored to a great extent. So the next method is the audiolingual method. So this is a teaching method that emphasizes foreign language teaching, listening and speaking before reading and writing. So audiolingualism methodology is expected to allow students to communicate in foreign languages through memorizing the structure and sounds of words. So the advantage of this method is that it has been based on psychological approach, which is the behaviorism. Next is that the teacher models student learning pronunciation. The disadvantage is that no creativity students repeat and memorize what they do not understand. Then second is that the techniques used by this method become tedious and boring, causing fatigue.
Community language learning. In this part, community language learning began to receive more attention. L2 teachers and innovators made use of research insight in the fields of cognitive and educational psychology by Vygotsky and Piaget, which led them to develop more humanistic methods focusing on the social interaction and affected and interpersonal factors in learning. So in this method, Teachers were seen as counselors rather than instructors, providing a warm, empathic, and non-threatening environment where their clients, the student, could share their insecurities and anxiety about learning a new language. So in this way, the learners were gradually supposed to become more independent in using the alto to express their own thoughts. Around this time, a method called the silent way developed by Caleb Gattigno also became more widespread, in contrast to community language learning. However, the rationale behind this approach was more concerned with cognition than with effect. So in this method of learning, language through problem solving, the teacher spoke only when it's necessary, thus encouraging students to figure out the rules of the language by themselves, instead of relying on the teacher to model and guide the process. In the early 1980s, natural approach became popular. Based on the input of natural order hypothesis discussed above, it was believed that if the learners had a low enough affected filter, they would automatically acquire the target language when exposed to comprehensible input slightly above their current proficiency level. So, while the natural approach did not use any techniques varying freely instead from other methods, it was innovated in its focus on meaningful communication within a non-threatening classroom environment. However, with increasing criticism of Krashen theories of language acquisition, the natural approach began to give away to communicative language teaching or CLT, which is now one of the most commonly employed approaches in classroom today. Krashen theories of language acquisition, the natural approach, began to give way to communicative language teaching or CLT, which is now one of the most commonly employed approaches in classroom today. So, like the natural approach, CLT also highlights communication as a means of facilitating language development. However, whereas the natural approach focused almost exclusively on speaking and paying attention to meaning with the little attention to matters of form, CLT addresses all four skills: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. It also incorporates recent insights about the importance of active learner participation and the development of communicative competence, emphasizing the student needs to be able to produce language in linguistically and culturally appropriate ways to carry out certain functions. For example, two students could work together on a map activity to figure out the correct route to a restaurant from the school. One learner would have a set of direction from MapQuest with half of them blanked out, and the other learner would have the actual map. Without seeing each other pictures, they would have to work together using locative construction question and negatives in order to complete the task successfully with language that is sufficiently fluent and accurate. In CLT, the teacher's role is not so much to provide comprehensible input, but rather to act as an advisor and facilitator, answering questions and creating learning situation in which students can engage in purposeful communication. So that is the end of my report.
Bridging the theory pedagogy gap. Bridging the theory pedagogy gap advices in SLA research and linguistic theory have influenced how languages are thought to be learned and taught. So current SLA research suggested that in selecting a method, teachers also need to consider their learners' backgrounds and the context and institutional constraints within which they are working, as well as their own experience and intuitions. So SLA theory should not dictate what happens in the classroom, but it can provide language teachers with information about classroom possibilities and ideas that they can evaluate for their own adaptation. So, one of the major and enduring problems in teacher education is the theory-practice gap, because this gap refers to discrepancy
novice teachers encounter between the nature of their teacher preparation program. So the teachers must be aware of current issues in SLA or second language acquisition research in order to come to an educated consensus in choosing the proper instructional materials for the students at their schools or at the classrooms.
Good afternoon once again. The last part of our topic is all about the task-based language teaching and learning. I will just give you a short but concise explanation about this. Ano nga ba yung role ng task-based language sa second language learning? So, ganito po yun. Nakaka-benefits po siya. The way ma-understand natin ang mabuti yung output, ma-modify natin yung output, ma-receive natin and ma-deliver yung mga feedbacks or informations, ma-address natin yung linguistic challenges, and ma-achieve natin yung mga predefined goals. Next is, for this slide, I will just give you an explanation through giving you an example. So, for example is, may isang student na pinaaral ng teacher or pinabasa ng teacher, then there is this one word na mispronounce niya, then na-notice yon ng classmates niya, then pinagtawanan siya. Then, paano natin maa-apply or mapapasok yung task-based language dito? Mapapasok po natin yon the way na bibigyan sila ng task para ma-practice yung speaking and listening language nila, na ma-foster yung conversational interaction. So mostly is ginagawa po itong Confluence events sa L2 production and development, for them to boost their L2 production and development. So, ayan. Sa part na to, I will give you a short but concise example para mas maintindihan nyo. Example nito is, may task kayo, for example, by pair. Then, the only way na makuha or makakommunicate kayo with each other is through words lamang. And sa words na yon, dun nyo masusukat kung paano nyo mas maiintindihan yung isa't isa, or yung way kung paano nyo ma-receive and or ma-deliver yung mga feedbacks or information na gusto nyong i-share sa isa't isa. So that is one of the example of task-based language and learning. So next one is, so dito sa slide na to, when categorizing distinct sorts of works, it is helpful to note that the varying along a number of dimensions, such as the first one. So, itong 4 category na to, it is involved or nakapaloob to siya sa task-based language and learning. So, the first one is the flow of information. So, ano itong flow of information? For example, may task kayo and by pair. Nakadepende sa inyong dalawa kung paano yung flow ng information, kung paano ninyo i-receive, kung paano mo i-deliver yung idea mo, yung information mo, or paano niya i-deliver yung sa kanya, and paano ma-receive yung information na galing sa kanya. So it depends on the two of you kung paano kayo, or kung paano ang flow ng information na gagawin ninyo. Kung written ba or through words. So the second one is the task goals, open or close characters. So for example, ito is groupings. Then one of the member sa group nyo is parang bida-bida siya. Yung parang sinasabi niya na alam niya na lahat. Then yung leader nyo is gusto niyang marinig yung bawat isa sa members niya kung ano yung ideas. Kasi mas maraming ideas, mas maraming makombine, mas maraming masum up na information. So, the third one is the degree of task complicity. So, dito sa the degree of task complicity, dito nakabase kung complete thought ba yung task na gagawin nyo or hindi siya naka-well detailed. So, the last one is the availability of duration of planning time. So, dito nakasaad yung time or for example, yung teacher nyo, magbibigay siya ng task agad-agad bukas ipapas. So, parang mandatory na gagawin nyo and tatapusin or ipapasa nyo agad bukas. So, that is the distinct sorts of works sa dimensions na involved sa task-based language and learning. So, dito sa last slide, it really talks about that task-based learning really helps second language acquisition. So, meron daw dalawang types of tasks which is efficient sila kung nagli-link silang dalawa in any condition, and that is the teaching and the research. Thank you.